there's always a story behind the data. We like our reps to really own that story. That it starts with really the transparency into their own just stats and kind of overall pipeline makeup. But I think oftentimes we kind of shield our reps from that because we don't want to paralyze them with the data. But I found that when I talk to reps, they're oftentimes fascinated by their own sort of small business profile that I can kind of put together for them at a sort of, maybe not at the team level. They're not interested at the big data metrics, but for themselves, those little nuggets they can pull out of their pipeline, or, kind of things that, they can take from sort of strengths from, job to job or from role to role, I think are big highlights that we can key on from the data. And I always like to get the most out of them by providing sort of that nugget of value for them at the end user level as well.
This is Sales Ops Demystified, the number one most downloaded podcast in sales operations. We invite the brightest minds in sales ops onto the show to deconstruct the what, why, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebsta, a revenue intelligence platform used to identify risk in the pipeline and score customer engagement, and is sponsored by the Global Sales Operations Association and the UK Revenue Operations Network. Hello and welcome to another very special episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. Today we're joined by Demar Amacker. Demar, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom.
Demar, thank you so much for joining. Today I want to cover the kind of past sales ops history, specifically over the past 3 to 5 years. I know today we're currently Director of Revenue Operations at Zift Solutions. But I want to go right back to the start, actually. The first time you kind of made the decision to go into sales or RevOps, A, when was that? And B, why did you make that decision?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I didn't take the traditional, path that most people do to sales ops. I didn't major in anything sales ops related in college. I didn't have a finance or sort of, revenue kind of background in that regard. But I actually started in inside sales. That was my first job in a revenue kind of facing organization in professional sports of all places. So I got my start with the inside sales program at the Arizona Diamondbacks. Was selling everything from premium single game to season tickets. Realized very quickly that I as much as I love the sales culture, I wasn't really poised for the ups and downs kind of sales as a seller myself. So I really kind of dug deep and looked around the organization and felt where can I apply my skills that I've developed here on the sales team elsewhere. And I looked at projects that I'd taken on while I was a seller, working closely with our sales management on, how can we make our sales team more efficient, working closely with our then sort of head of, CRM at that time when I was with the Diamondbacks. And, he was more than, happy to interview me whenever he opened up a position on his staff. First kind of hire out of the inside sales program, which they had always used as a sort of bullpen for, advanced sort of sales talent. So as they're building up their account executives and, their customer, service and sort of, account management team, they looked internally to inside sales and looked at, those folks as, those, first SDRs, that we had, in the organization as the best place as a feeding ground for, the next sort of step, within the internal organization. And this was the first time that, it happened to be me that went the sort of sales ops direction. And I didn't look back. I've always, been very close to sales and always been very close to, the revenue organization, but always more from that supportive and sort of, process driven, kind of in the background lens.
Got it. And how important do you think that initial sales experience has been in the past? Say, I think it's 6 to 7 years you've been in sales / rev ops.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a huge aspect of how I empathize with my end customer, oftentimes, which is that salesperson or the person that's managing accounts or whatever it may be. I oftentimes have to put myself in their shoes, and if I hadn't had that experience as a sort of full service, full menu seller and account manager, early in my career, I wouldn't have been able to really go through what they've gone through, both from a sort of smiling and dialing and just kind of not the best sort of old school sales practices, and finding better ways to to really capitalize on on their time and energy, but also from like that morale, right? What really motivates a salesperson, and how each salesperson has a different sales kind of career path. And if you don't really, look at that and understand that, you're not empathizing with them as a person, you're going to really have a lot of, a lot more turnover in your sales organization. I think that's something that I've, kind of excelled at through my career, is just sort of empathizing with that end seller.
Got in. What does motivate a salesperson?
I think it's a lot of things, right? It's sales, kind of trajectory. I think it's a lot of time it's the age old answer of money in their pocket, but I think it's also a lot of freedom and the ability to really control their destiny, and clarity and transparency throughout the organization. So I think the things that I find time and time again are priorities for my sellers are just kind of human nature of they're straight shooters. They just want to want to know what's what their targets are, but they also want to have a clear path of sort of growth within the company as well, whether that be as a senior seller or as a kind of the management track, or something else account management related outside of the sort of direct selling world as well. But just being open to sort of their desires and having that sort of two-way street.
Makes total sense. And on the note of like metrics, etc., and ensuring that salespeople know like where they stand in the organization, you mentioned that in a previous role, this is a core software. You developed and distributed sales dashboards with KPIs for sales management. What do you think over like your whole sales ops career has been one of the most insightful or useful sales metrics to track?
I think for me, being able to track sort of sentiment on calls, that we use Chorus AI, and that's a platform that I believe heavily in. I think understanding and being able to use data to coach and train up, especially from an education at the different stages in the sales cycle, understanding best practices, and having this library of content to go back to. I think understanding what truly leads to a win. And it's very subjective oftentimes, from an overall sort of beginning of sales cycle to end of sales cycle. But I think the one of the metrics that I always kind of tie back to is time to close. How long are deals going through that person's sales cycle, and who are the best people at sort of pushing deals forward. And I have that as one of my metrics on my dashboard is what is the sort of average sales cycle, and how does that salesperson measure up to that? Because obviously sales velocity is obviously a big thing when we're talking to sort of the board metrics and looking to sort of how do we make sure that we're always driving more pipeline, and at the end of the day shortening time to sale.
Sure. And if let's say we see a rep who is like in the bottom 25% in terms of time to close, how would you address that situation? What would you say to the rep, and what would you encourage them to work on?
Yeah, I think for us, we definitely have a very sort of enterprise-driven customer, ideal customer profile. So, we like to look at sort of what the mix of that pipeline is. We realize, the tier 3, we call them, or sort of, more small business, mid-market deals are going to move faster. But, we like to look at what that mix is and see, are they big chunky deals that are taking, more on the larger, side of our sales cycle? If not, if that's the case, we can clearly justify it. But there's always a story behind the data, and we like our reps to really own that story. But that starts with really the transparency into their own, just stats and kind of overall pipeline makeup. But I think oftentimes we kind of shield our reps from that because we don't want to paralyze them with the data. But I found that, when I talk to reps, they're oftentimes fascinated by their own sort of small business profile that I can kind of put together for them at a sort of, maybe not at the team level. They're not interested at the big data metrics, but for themselves, those little nuggets they can pull out of their pipeline, or, kind of things that, they can take from sort of strengths, from, job to job, or, from role to role, I think are big kind of highlights that we can, key on from the data. And I always like to, get the most out of, them by providing sort of that nugget of, value for them at the end user level as well.
Got it. Let's zoom in now at Zift Solutions. Just for the benefit of the audience, roughly what size sales team do we have? And then also what like the sales ops / RevOps team / resources that you're working with?
Yeah, so I am really a kind of a team of one as far as the RevOps landscape. Definitely going to be building out that team and function. I've only been in the role about a month and a half or so relatively new to my role at Zift. But the larger kind of sales and account management org is roughly 25 to 30 people, and then we have I oversee our SDR business development team, which is sitting at roughly 3 today. So a little bit of a hybrid kind of, role in my function as well.
Awesome. And since joining, what has been like, well, I know when you join new businesses in senior positions, there's like an avalanche of stuff you have to try and understand. But have you been able to actually implement or make any changes since joining that have had a significant impact on the sales force?
Yeah. So my immediate goal when I got here was to get as many of the sort of leadership team folks as I could off of their spreadsheets. It's very siloed, kind of disorganized kind of sense of, the truth, source of truth of data, right? Because I like to look at it this way, and I have this dashboard over here, and I have this export that I'm using here, and really kind of just coming back to a sense of source of truth, being Salesforce, and really, being that sort of, internal champion for Salesforce that was lacking, I think, for a while. But also, I think for me, I implemented, from a Salesforce perspective, the forecasting module, and we've seen some uplift with that. So just, bringing some of the unused features of our existing tech stack to life, just with my background and expertise in implementation of those features, has already sort of seen some growth and uplift already.
Bringing features to life sounds like a solid start. For the rest of 2021, what are you going to be focused on from a sales ops / RevOps perspective?
So we bought the Salesforce CPQ sort of tool a few months ago before my arrival. There was some implementation done on that, but really want to align a lot of our business sort of processes around that beefed up version of Salesforce's kind of CPQ model, where we're really pumping a lot of our quotes and order forms and a lot of the content that's marketing sort of sponsored with logos and very moving away from that sort of proposal deck that's sort of sort of a Frankenstein cut and paste and whatever, just really something clean that like when you get something from from a respectable, tech vendor, what does it look like from a quote standpoint, or from a SOW standpoint, or from an order form standpoint, just making sure that it's all buttoned up from our terms and conditions and all of that stuff, just making lives easier for everyone, from the top of the food chain all the way down from to our implementation folks who are really driving the product home at the end of the day, making sure there's clarity there and really aligning all of the sides of the business.
Perfect. Who's going to be the first RevOps hire?
That's a tough one. I think for me, as I oversee more of the business development side of things, I think really someone that's kind of administrating day to day, kind of taking the load off, a sales ops manager number 2, right? I report directly to our CRO, and I try to be a force multiplier for her as much as I possibly can. Being able to sit in on meetings that maybe she would take her time unnecessarily, kind of serving as that buffer for her. So someone that could kind of do that for me, serving as that sort of number 2 buffer, that has some sales ops experience, but also looking to really make a name and leave a legacy from a sales ops perspective as well.
Makes total sense. For like having somebody come in and take on like the baseline work, so that you can then be more strategic, and that also feeds up to the CRO, right? Then you can take more of the CRO's work, and then she can be more strategic. So that makes total sense. Whenever you have a job description, ping it over to us, and we'll add it to the show notes of this episode in case anybody is listening and is interested in joining you. Now, the final and probably most important question of the interview is, who in the world of RevOps would you most like to take for lunch?
Oh man, that's tough. But there's a guy that's doing a lot of really putting a lot of content out there. I'd love to get his name out there. Jordan Henderson over at Ring Central. He's definitely a leader, I think, in the space from a content perspective, and always sharing a lot of great insights. And would love to sit down and just pick his brain on everything that he's doing. Appreciate all the content he puts out, and would love to, like I said, pick his brain.
Awesome. We'll reach out to Jordan and see if he wants to jump on. Demar, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing the kind of journey you're going through of an early stage-ish addition to an existing sales team. Sounds like obviously you're doing an awesome job, and the sales ops and the sales team is going to be growing over the coming months and years. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Of course, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. If you are listening on a podcast listening application, then please subscribe, rate, and review. And if you have any questions about the show, if you know a guest, or if you have any questions about sales operations, just hit me up at tomhunt@ebster.com. That's tomhunt@ebster.com.